Howdy folks, I'm Southern Wolf of Southern Wolf Studios. Welcome back to Samurai of Hyuga. First we're going to take a look at how far we've been coming along in our stats. We have a preference in calculative, a preference in perverted, preference in stoic, a preference in protective, and a preference in finesse. Chapter 4. The Lion Temple. With the Kabuki Theater behind us, Matsumi and I made for the temple, specifically the Lion Temple where Toshi and other assorted dangers awaited. I knew little and less about the shrine layout of the city. I couldn't even point out the brothels from a samurai's mansion. Guess I'd have to rely on how much fun it sounded like they were having. That particular sound belonged to my companion, who dragged her feet and made altogether too much noise to be an effective midnight prowler. Staying up past her bedtime didn't do well for her temperament, which was uptight to begin with.
Curtail your pace, Okami. Would you have me presented as begrimed, sweated, and disarrayed?
Matsumi halted and produced a handkerchief from her knapsack, which she used to wipe the sweat from her brow. Even this late at night, the summer heat was stifling.
We've slithered past our pursuers as would a serpent. Now let's take a moment to recompose ourselves.
We were snakes, all right. The rattling kind from all the noise she was making. Sure, there were no lanterns on this particular street, but I knew better than to take any chances. This was the capital, and the home of the Emperor himself. The two of us were a ripple in this stagnant pond, and I didn't care to know what lurked beneath. Shut up. We need... I was about to get venomous when I heard footsteps approaching. Shit! 1,000 different scenarios danced through my head. The clouds broke for a moment, the nearly full moon shedding its light on our next opponent. He was obviously a guardsman, sporting a laminar cuirass, body armor with layered plates, and a helmet that draped down the sides of his neck and shoulders. More important was a spear, which he leaned against as if it were a walking stick. He was an older man with a long gray mustache that hung from his lips down past his jawline. As precocious as his facial hair was, it was his expression that unsettled me the most. A smile and friendly demeanor. Good evening and well met. It's a beautiful night for a summer's walk, is it not? The man's eyes hazed over for a moment like a drunkard's. He continued his greeting without waiting for a response. Are you perhaps tourists? Oh, I nearly didn't see the charming little lady there. Who is this young mistress? Those hazy eyes weren't fooling me. I'd have to answer before the kid spoke up and said something foolish. Or worse, something honest. She's my sister. While the age gap was, well, significant, it wasn't impossible for Matsumi and I to be siblings, especially not if we had a wealthy father with taste for young wives. It was a very common preference among rich men in any era. And in any case, it looked as if the guardsman accepted my answer. Ha-ha! From the silk alone, I can wager which one is your father's favorite. He laughed heartily at his own joke, which even I had to admit wasn't half bad. The Shugenja's red silk kimono cost more a row than my entire wardrobe, all of which I was currently wearing. Matsumi chuckled awkwardly as the tension in the air seemed to subside. Seemed being the key word. A blissful cool breeze blew by, but I wasn't able to enjoy it. I was too busy evaluating the patrolman's stance. While he appeared to be leaning against his spear, the heels of his feet were flat solid against his sandals. His eyes were willing me to strike out at his weapon, to take advantage of the weakness he so openly displayed. I was dealing with an experienced fighter. This situation only grew more dangerous the longer we waited, but we didn't have to wait long before he looked off into the distance and started talking again. Ganji, is that you? His gaze returned to meet mine, and he nodded in a curt but polite bow. Sorry, it was one of my friends. He said he wasn't going to make it to his post. Been awful sick lately, you see. What I see is a typical intimidation tactic. This veteran soldier turned watchman was signaling that he had boys watching every move we make. It could be a bluff, or it could be a warning. As I considered my options, the guardman asked me one more question, this time in a tone that was a little less than friendly. So where are you headed tonight? Actually, we could use some directions. Matsumi and I were hardly tourists, but we certainly came from out of town. If I was going to pull the wool over this guardsman's eyes, I was going to need some quality fabric to work with. I ushered the Shugenja into producing a map of the city. While she scrounged around her satchel, it was up to me to sell this little lie. I specified what I was looking for. We're trying to find an inn to stay at the night. Needless to say, we haven't had much luck. It was the only believable explanation for two lost sightseers this late in the evening. Whether he bought it or not was another story. Regardlessly, the guardsman reluctantly took hold of the parchment and examined it closely. His first mistake was taking both his hands off his weapon, and it might be his last. No, I won't fight like this. Chivalrous has increased. The front of the neck, under the arms, between the inner thighs, those were his openings. After years of killing for a living, you couldn't help but notice this sort of thing. The temptation was always there, but this time I resisted it. There had always been ways to solve problems that didn't require me to clean off my katana afterwards. As far as the best ryokan in the city is concerned, their open-air hot baths soothe an old man's bones better than a good sake. He pointed to a nearby building on Mitsumi's map and bid us goodbye. Part of me was relieved to be rid of his presence so quickly. The other part of me knew better. When we walked out of earshot and were a few blocks closer to the recommended sauna, Matsumi piped up.
What an affable infantryman. Though, Okami, our destination isn't a ryokan. We're supposed to...
I know where our destination is, kid. I also know that we're being tailed. We're a stone's throw away from the Imperial Palace. Don't you think it's a bit strange that he didn't insist on escorting us? My question caused the Shugenja's brow to furrow in puzzlement, as she struggled with the idea that people could lie with the friendliest of smiles.
It is peculiar, I suppose, but we must make for the Lion Temple nonetheless. I do not wish to delay my appointment any longer.
I had a feeling I would need an appointment with a bottle of sake after this was all over. The temple district was blissfully empty. Monks tend to keep honest hours, and even the most devout of Shinto worshippers had to sleep sometimes. I wouldn't admit it, but without Mitsumi here to read the signs, I would never found the place. The Lion Temple was ornate from the outside, but not well maintained and smaller than I expected. It was almost tucked away into its own little corner. I voiced my thoughts aloud. Seems a bit shabby compared to the rest of the shrines I'm used to seeing. Shugenja's eyes lit up as they always did before explaining something. I dare say she enjoyed lecturing me.
Its dilapidation is a sign of its age. This temple could not service a vast crowd like those in most cities. The interior is most assuredly a holdover from olden days, except a large central shrine with an upstairs loft granting clear view of the chamber.
I didn't much care for the olden days, but knowledge of the layout of the building beforehand might just save our lives, especially if this was a shinobi setup. Matsumi continued with even more enthusiasm.
It is said that in more barbaric times, these sanctuaries served as defensible locations with archers lined upstairs. That was back when Hyuga was little more than a tribe of impoverished fishermen.
She nodded to herself before shifting topics.
The sign of the lion occurs late in the fall season, and thus isn't even visible in tonight's sky. Very few would make offerings now, and no ceremonies ought to be scheduled for months yet.
In other words, this was a meeting someone wanted to keep secret. After grasping my katana and my resolve, I slid open the entrance and entered the lion's den. There were 6 candles lit in front of the shrine, doing their best to light up the stunted chamber. Since I expected ninjas to be in every shadow, I wish they did a better job. The floor was wooden but waxed, and might have even shined if it wasn't layered in dust. There were no pews or seats, of course, but the few tatami mats that lay on the floor looked about as comfortable as an anvil's face. The shrine was sparsely decorated, aside from a large wooden sculpture of a lion that rested just inside the candlelight's range. The shadows emphasized every cut and every carve of the majestic beast, which gave off a proud yet uncertain expression. It looked almost fearful, but of what? I wasn't an art critic, so I wasn't sure what to make of it. It didn't surprise me, however, that my companion was.
This sculpture is exceedingly strange. The capital shrines do most of their chiseling in brass, gold, jade, or ivory. Wood is regarded as an inferior and not befitting the emperor's taste. What do you think, Okami?
I was more concerned about the darkness on the upper levels, where anyone or anything could hide themselves in. At least we hadn't been struck down by shuriken, poison darts, or arrows yet. The kid still wanted an answer. How did I feel about this stupid lion? Looks like something a kondo would make. Calculative has increased. Huh. Looks like something a kondo would make. Most folks would review my remark as a grave insult, but kondos hawk their wood carvings at street vendors everywhere. Well, everywhere but Yamato. While I had my reservations against the local city watch, they did a better job of cleaning up filth more than most, but I doubt even they could ride the... A more astute observation than you may know. The wooden stairs creaked at every step. 2 figures emerged from upstairs, men, but only one of their footsteps made a sound. The one who spoke wore a large black silk robe in a fashion I had never seen before. Atop his head sat a priestly-looking hat with a flat top and a tassel that flowed behind him as he approached. It wasn't until I saw the scepter in his hand that I started to piece together his identity, and started to lose a piece of my sanity. I'm glad you arrived on such short notice. His tired yet compassionate voice paired with a warm smile. He was somewhere in his 20s, although his deep brown eyes held a burden of a man far older. The aura of nobility, the magnetism he emitted was unmistakable. I knew in my gut who he was before he said it. My knees buckled, my hands pressed flat against the wooden floor beneath me, my head bowed low enough that my eyelashes nearly scraped the dust. I am Emperor Satsuma. You may be at ease. Even with the Emperor's own reassurance, I couldn't keep my body from freezing up. My heart raced like I was in a sword fight and was sure to lose. His Imperial Majesty stood before me, the divine being inspired by the gods, Kami, to rule over Hyuga. I felt the weight of all my sins on my shoulders, and I just couldn't raise them. I glanced over at Mitsumi, who, unlike me, didn't have her head anchored to the floor. Instead, the kid had a glowing smile on her face that made me feel even more pathetic. I'm supposed to be the tough one here, damn it. I'd been too busy cursing at myself to notice a hand until it was already placed on my head. A jolt not unlike lightning ran through me. The single most important, powerful man in Hyuga ran his divine fingers through my hair. I hadn't washed in weeks. Okami-san, you are from Genfu, are you not? His question was full of an almost childish curiosity, and even my own name sounded like a stranger's from his graceful voice. My own voice was caught up in my throat. I could only make the slightest of nods. That is where the old capital was, where my grandfather and his father before him reigned. There was a despicable custom there, centuries old, in which civilians who gazed upon the emperors had their eyes removed. That fear remains in so many there to this day. Was this a subconscious fear, instilled in even a street urchin? Could a 100-year-old ritual make my arms shake and my knees quiver? I was a master swordsman and a ruthless assassin, yet now I felt like a child. But while I was humbled, a calmness enveloped me, a moment of tranquility no amount of sake could match. I looked up into his eyes. You are the sword who cuts the heavens, the man in my dreams. Now rise, you never need to bow to me again, Okami-san. At the end of his words, my body stopped shaking. My nerves no longer rattled inside me. I slowly stood with an uncertain footing at first. I nearly toppled over, but I didn't. Satsuma was nearly a full head shorter than I, and he no longer looked intimidating from up here. My body stopped shaking in apprehension. I didn't know about dreams or cutting heavens, but I knew I'd gotten my resolve back. Resolve enough to carry on a conversation with His Imperial Majesty anyway. But just as I was ready to reply, Satsuma's attention turned towards my companion. Was she in his dream as well? Talk about an annoying nightmare. Hashimoto-san, thank you for being here. It pains me to burden such a young Shingenja with this responsibility, but you are among the few who are not inducted into the military. The grimace on his face was a certain sign of pain, which caused my mind to go into spirals about what this responsibility might be. With my wits returned to me, I finally noticed a second man who nearly melted into the darkness. I realized it wasn't a man at all, but a woman. The midnight blue shinobi garb tightened around her curves only a kunoichi could have. The mask hid all but her eyes, though my gaze lingered around her hips. I was searching for weapons, although I was content for looking for other reasons. I ended up getting her attention, but she simply crossed her arms and shot me a nasty look in return. Not very talkative, though most ninjas weren't. Matsumi had said something in a whisper that I didn't catch. I did hear the Emperor's reply, however. Yes, that's an interesting answer. The divine gentleman turned and started pacing closer to the wooden statue. His hand reached out to the lion's mane, which he traced as gently as he had with mine. I believe the body's pain comes from living with our spirit, like a mouse who rattles too hard against its cage. Speaking of, his eyes returned to mine. And you, Okami-san? What would you do if you had no fear? I'd face down the shadows of my past. I made a lot of enemies in my life. Those who didn't hunt me during the day haunted me during the nights as I lay sleepless. How many restless evenings were filled by their words, their cries, and their screams. If I had no fear, I could face those horrors down and sleep soundly again. I could be at peace for the first time in this lifetime. As it stands, that sort of tranquility would have to wait until my heart stops beating. The Emperor nodded as if he could understand what I had gone through, but the earnest expression on his face shattered my cynicism into pieces. Could it be that he sincerely cared? The shadows of our past, they do their best to dim the lights of our futures, don't they? Satsuma pressed his finger against a spot where the line was cracked, a blemish slight enough that no casual observer would notice. I crafted this statue myself. Woodcrafting is a means of an escape for me. The lion is my affinity, if the saying holds any purchase. I had it submitted into a contest last year, anonymously, of course. He chuckled at the memory. The, nobility here don't hold wood sculpting in high regards. But these hands... He opens his palms, which were more callous than any nobleman's ought to be, especially considering they belonged to the Emperor himself. Could never create something as elegant and beautiful. Anger, lust, fear, I can capture all those well. I was struggling to capture the purpose of this secret meeting, but thankfully the priestly ruler finally got to the matter at hand. I'm sorry, I've gotten off track. And we don't have the candle wax to waste on metaphors. I have had this reoccurring vision at night, nightmares in the pattern of 6. I have reason to trust these visions, and I have kept them secret all save the 3 of you. He smiled to his ninja, who nodded respectfully. As for me, my wrist started itching. So the kid and I went through this entire ordeal just because he was having bad dreams? I cracked my wrist to release some of the tension I was feeling. It was a habit of mine. The ninja responded with another one of her glares, dissuading me from making any more sudden movements. The elegant words turned from soft to sharp in a powerful tone more accustomed to an authoritative figure. They depict the spirits that will trigger events leading to the downfall of Hyuga. Mitsumi gasped in dramatic fashion. I was too dazed from what I was hearing to react, so I just continued to listen to this, even though I didn't know what this was. The spiritual balance in this world is more sensitive than you can imagine. Demonic forces do exist, and I have seen it corrupt many men before my very eyes. And I have had this vision of your spirits as well. In every act of fearlessness you take, your spirits grow larger. Emperor Satsuma paused before asking, have you felt this inside you? I'll let Mitsumi answer first. I decided to let Mitsumi answer. She knew more about the spirits than I ever would, and not only because she was a Shingenja. My spirit and I were never very close. You hear stories of guidance and good conscience from ethereal animal beings all the time, but I always dismissed them as folktales. I certainly didn't need anyone, animal or otherwise, giving me a hard time. I like to think I do a good enough job of that on my own. The Shingenja's reluctancy to reply caught me a bit off guard. I had expected her typical enthusiasm, but this response was anything but.
The Red Panda and I once thrived, Your Majesty. Yet, ever since I've taken to my studies in alchemy, I haven't been able to... That is,
Her words trailed off as sad silence took over. Mitsumi was the most spiritually well-educated kid I knew. Seeing her get so disheartened made even a heartless man like me start to sympathize. But I had made it this far without imaginary pets, and so could she. A red panda, though. Those cat bears were certainly cute, and they made for expensive furs, too. It's a dead ringer for the kid. The young ruler nodded once again as if he expected that answer as well. It will return to you. Trust in what you have seen. Attunement will come. Now let me tell you of the spirits in my nightmares. Your targets. My wrist itched again. My ears picked up and my eyes widened. All this talk of spirits and bad dreams and hobbyist wood carving. Finally, we were discussing something I could understand. His Imperial Majesty wanted me to kill people for him. Should have just said that from the start to save us both the hassle. First, I must warn you, my visions are not always accurate. I once had a daydream of you two beneath the shadow of a giant duck's wing. You were riding towards me upon a gigantic koi fish. Of all things. What silliness! Matsumi and I exchanged glances. There may be something to do with these dreams after all. The Emperor cleared his throat and proclaimed the following. 1. A spirit of greed. Her being taints those who are pure with her poison. I saw a nest of snakes. She must not be allowed to live. 2. The spirit of the mountain. This one will cause mudslides and earthquakes against my forces when the time comes. I saw an old man entangled with vines and undergrowth. It makes for a beautiful painting. 3. A spirit of opportunity. He will stop at nothing for power. I saw boats and mass bloodshed, an isolated village full of desperate children, where noble souls are endangered. I wake up feeling as if sea salt is being rubbed in my blood. 4. A spirit of manipulation. A truly vile creature who cannot be killed by normal means. I'm afraid that it will find you before you find it. 5. A spirit of honor. Show him that pride can cripple a man from the inside. I recognize the man, a general under my command, Chateau. He is the head of the barracks in the mountain pass. Tread carefully with this one. 6. And finally, a spirit yet pure. Of warring bloodlines of 2 clans. If they are united, they will grow too powerful. You'll have to swing your sword in a different way to finish this. I had to hand it to the Emperor. Of all the assassination contracts I had taken on, this made the least amount of sense. For starters, some of these targets didn't even sound human. Last I checked, my katana could only cut through flesh and bone, not magical monsters from another plane of existence. Even with that aside, I couldn't help but frown. After a complication that occurred around 5 years back, I made it a motto not to have multiple employers at once. I doubted that Matsumi caused any problems, but you can never be too sure in my line of work. Biting off more than you could chew was a good way to suffocate. But I guess I could make an exception for the ruler and most powerful man in Hyuga. My less than pleased look prompted Emperor Satsuma to ask a question. I will provide whatever additional information I can, Okami-san. So, do these spirits give off a smell or something? Charming has increased. So, do these spirits give off a smell or something? Those descriptions left out all the most important details. Height, weight, appearance, for example. Names wouldn't hurt either, but I won't get that greedy. The fact of the matter is, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be searching for. The last thing I want is to kill someone I'm not getting paid to. Damn, I'm starting to sound like my old self again. I thought I was supposed to be singing a different tune these days. You will know. Satsuma continued. Your spirit will guide you to them. Moss to a flame, I believe the expression is. The candlelight flickered, as did my confidence in this plan. Screwing up on a regular job meant that I had to lay low for a week or two. Failing the Emperor, well, a funeral pyre with me on the stake. With that imagery in mind, I kept paying attention. Secrecy is everything in this matter, which is why I had to get the 2 of you involved, and why I can do so little to support you further. Every move I make is scrutinized. I am distrusted by the other nobles at my court and even my own generals. The political situation is, well, complicated to put it mildly. If news of my visions were to get out, I would be distrusted further. I shot Matsumi a glance while the Emperor petted his lion again. She was captivated in every move the graceful ruler made, staring with open eyes and listening with an open mind. I'd seen the look on the girl's face before, and I hoped that she'd wise up before getting herself hurt. Although, I suppose even the most talented of bodyguards couldn't protect against a broken heart. As you know, I took up my father's position only 2 years ago. I am titled the Young Lion in public, but I know the names that my political opponents call me in private. Even as they try to snip my claws, you two shall be my thunder and growl. You two will keep the evil at bay where I cannot. His confidence seemed to echo against the walls of this destitute chamber, spreading to each of us like a disease. I was feeling more than a little delusional by this point. The confidence turned into foreboding prophecy, the sort of prediction that always came true in stories. There are about to be great changes in this empire. My wedding is scheduled for the end of the harvest, when the sign of the lion is highest in the sky. From then the scales will pour in our favor, but only for a year's time. This mission must be fulfilled during this period, otherwise, Hyuga is doomed. The awkward silence that followed caused a question to spark in my mind. I was ashamed by it in two ways. That I thought of it in the first place, and that I didn't think of it sooner. Ask about payment. Every fiber in my being was burning to ask the pivotal question. It didn't matter if this man ruled Hyuga, dreamt of spirits, or courted foreign princesses. Okami doesn't work for charity. We're getting paid, right? I mean, traveling expenses and such. Roaming all around the countryside to hunt these spiritual villains was, among other things, a logistical nightmare. Food and lodging, bribes for bandit gang, guides through inhospitable terrain, decent sake to keep myself sane. The list went on. The Emperor may not be able to offer us samurai support, but with the aid of that jingle in your pocket was also fine by me. The ruler scratched the back of his head in embarrassment and nearly knocked his headpiece off. I can count myself among the few able to unsettle his imperial majesty and keep my neck on afterwards. I had nearly forgotten. Though as it stands, my stipend is monetized like a hawk does a mouse. I can only give you this necklace, which you may be able to sell for a sizable sum. He removed a sparkling ivory necklace encrusted with jewels that he had hidden beneath the folds of his priestly kimono. I could tell in an instant its value was immense. This caused the shinobi to break her long-held silence. Satsu, my imperial majesty, what was your mother, and you shouldn't hand it to these outlaws! The voice was familiar. The ninja's fist shook in my direction with barely restrained rage. I was prepared to dodge a right hook when Satsuma put an end to it with a harsh voice. Okami-san is no outlaw. This trinket will serve him more than it ever could around my neck, and besides... He walked up to Mutsumi, who was paralyzed from the proximity she now shared with the almighty ruler. Redness lit up her cheeks as the Emperor motioned his hands behind her neck to fit the pendant around. It looks far better on you than me, Mutsumi-chan. It'll match the lily in your hair. He parted the girl's hair back to its original form, his eyes smiling warmly down to hers. The moment they were sharing made me sick to my stomach, for a few reasons, but it was the shinobi who got a sudden cough and broke the silence. After the necklace was securely fashioned, the Emperor turned towards me and spoke with a frightful sense of finality, and while it was directed at me, I felt as if its words were meant for someone much greater. I must return now, and feign ignorance as I entertain the fools of my court. Orchestrating this has been no easy task. But it was something that had to be done. Know that my visions are not always accurate, and the future is never written in stone. As I leave, I have but one asset left to lend you. He looked at the masked woman in shinobi guard. My most trusted advisor and greatest friend, Toshi.